Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the redistricting public meeting. I just want to say a few notes, and then we will start the meeting. This is not a city council meeting. This is just a public presentation from our consultants on redistricting for the wards, the 9 wards here in Warwick. There will be no votes taken tonight. There will be another presentation and formal votes happening at the April 4th City Council meeting. So this is just the first of a public hearing. No votes will be taken tonight. The committee will meet again and make a recommendation to the full council after another public comment at the April 4th City Council meeting. This meeting is being recorded for anybody that would like to view it after. So at this time, I just want to acknowledge the committee, Councilman Jim McElroy, Councilman Anthony Sinapi, and I'm Steve McAllister. And also in attendance is Councilman Ricks and Councilman Howe. Again, it is not a city council meeting, but the 3 members of the council of this particular committee are sitting at this table at this time. So if we have a microphone ready, we have our consultants here that are going to walk us through the process. And we have a map up here. And again, this will be the first presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman. What we have done is a variety of different looks at, and if you recall, we have met with just about every councilman to get input from them as well as input from the public. So we have an initial proposal that we wanted to share with you in terms of what seems to work in most instances. We ended up sending you a paper copy of this that I believe was shared. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Then it wasn't. All right. So we have that, and we can provide PDF to the committee as well as whatever public you want to distribute it on in that sense. This is a map that tends to show you streets if you zoom down in. It's made so that it can be printed large so that you can see the streets. But you can see if we zoom down in here, you can generally read where the various streets are. I'm sorry. Okay. There we go. Yes. So it's generally what you can end up seeing is street names and where the borders are in that regard. And then we also have another set of maps in a system that we call Autobound, which is what we use for drawing districts. And here we can zoom down in much closer and see houses. We can see we can have aerial photographs behind this so you can see exactly what it looks like on the street. What this lets us do is we can end up not only seeing aerial wise what it is, but we can see graphically in color what the districts are. And so you can tell where assignments have been. District 1 on the right and District 2 on the left. And those are connected to the spreadsheet across the bottom. So those numbers that are there on the bottom lets us know the populations that are in the districts that are shown on the screen. It also lets us see whether or not you have populations that are within a certain guideline. The Supreme Court has told us that the guideline is basically plus or minus 5% for an overall 10% guideline. But we can end up seeing if there's a check mark there, then it's within the 5% deviation. If it is too low or too high, it turns red and tells us that you're out of deviation linkage, and so you need to make some more changes. We have, if you recall, we have both the population data from the Census Bureau, which is the table on the right-hand side. That's the original population table. And then the state looked at the question of what to do with the ACI and the ACI prisoners. And so the state decided that they would adjust and allow those prisoners to go back to their home, but only if they were there for 2 years or less, under the theory that you have, if you're looking at who was there on April 1st of 2020, which is Census Day. So that was what we got from the ACI, the records from ACI. And if you're going to be there for 2 years between April 1st, 2020, and basically the November election in 2022, when the first election is, when you have districts that are drawn with the 2020 census, the theory was that if we give people that 2-year period, anybody that's in ACI that is going to be released within that 2-year time period, we'll move them back to their home. Because by the time they're being represented by somebody in the legislature or whatever, they're going to be back home, is what the theory was. So that's what the legislature did. And so that's what's in the adjusted population tabulation to the left-hand side. Now, there wasn't a lot of people moved. It was about 41% of the ACI. And so there was a little bit of change. There was some coming into Warwick, obviously more in Providence, but it was only 700 in Providence. And 45 here. So it's not that big of an impact from the city side in terms of Warwick in that regard. But it is being shown both ways so that we make sure that both of them are in sync, in essence, on the deviation side. So what we can end up doing is we can go through each of the districts, and share with you some of the reasoning of what we had done and listening to what the requests were. And I'm going to turn it over to Ryan because he's the one that was doing most of the line drawing on that side.
Thank you, Kim. As I mentioned to all the council meetings earlier, I kind of saw that approached this with kind of a hierarchy of 3 reasons that we are even here. One is the lines that we have to change, what lines that we should change, and also lines that would be maybe a good idea to change if it helps keep a neighborhood closer together. One of the reasons why I've kind of had a focus on this area between 1 and 2 was because when we did the initial look of the existing wards, 1 had to gain population, and so did 3. Whereas wards 8 and 9 had to lose population because they had too many people in them, as opposed to the rest of the wards. So, so the 2 examples that we thought of together to where we could get a population that it needed to have, we focused on this area to where I'll bring in the existing lines here so you can kind of see what used to be there. And I'll bring in the House and Senate lines because they play a role too. Okay. I did say that one needed to grow, and when we looked at its border with Ward 2 and Ward 4, it seemed like it would be okay to bring it into Ward 2, because that was, the house line was changed to be down Atlantic Avenue, and so we just shifted the ward line. We proposed a ward line to go down Atlantic Avenue also. And another example of Ward 3 needing population, quite a bit of population, and so we brought all of Weathersfield Common into the ward, as well as going down Spooner Ave. I hope I see that right. Spooner Ave down to the 112, 113. These are examples of lines that we made because we had to get these wards to be larger. Ward 8 was one that was too large, and Ward 9 was one that was too large. And since we cut down 8 quite a bit by bringing in 3, it helped out the town's election department to bring down the line from 8 to 9 between 115 and 117. Not only did that bring 9 down to where it needed to be population-wise, it also got rid of a very small precinct that was there because of the new House and Senate lines. So, these are the kind of proposals we want to do that solve problems. The districts are too big or too small. The precincts in this area are highly inefficient. And then we also think about lines that exist where we could improve them to be better for the neighborhoods. Right now, the ward line between 4 and 3 is a path to the lake. Whereas if we bring in this block, then the entirety of the north end of Betsy Williams Drive is now in Ward 4, which makes canvassing easier. Or instead of cutting down before the end of Second Point Road, we can now bring down Second Point Road to the point as a boundary line, as a very identifiable boundary line between 6 and 5. These are lines that we're proposing just because it makes canvassing easier and there's less confusion about where the wards begin and start. And, and as you are well aware, this was an example of 3 blocks where 7 could come down in to Masthead so that we didn't have a tiny inefficient pocket precinct there. So every line that I have drawn here was kind of in response to to answer one of those 3 questions. Is this a line that we have to make as to get the deviation down below 10%? Is this a line that we should make, in order to not be inefficient for city elections? And this is also a line that we can make that would help bring neighborhoods more into wards or make it easier to canvass or to understand where the wards are located. I was told, not to reimagine the way that the wards are. So these are a collection of changes that are just there to try and solve one of those dilemmas. And each of those can be seen in this graphic that we can send out for distribution. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that may come from the subcommittee.
Thank you very much. So as you mentioned, there overall, in the general scheme of things, very, very few changes. We did not have to move too many. How many people-wise would you say, or households, however you conduct generally?
I would say less than 8,000.
Less than 8,000.
Yeah.
In the citywide.
Right
there.
Right.
Could you just go and just give the for Ward 1 and Ward 1, Ward 2, the border, that new border, if you just read out those streets again, not every neighborhood, but like the big streets there. So
Okay.
the new dividing line, if you would.
A new dividing line would be, I'm going to go to the satellite view. It has easier to read street names. Post Road and Atlantic Ave.
Post Road and Atlantic Ave.
And then back to the normal Warwick Ave.
And back to Warwick Ave, okay.
Okay.
And the other change between 8 and 9?
Instead of Tollgate Road, it now uses Centerville Road.
Okay, instead of Tollgate Road, it's now Centerville Road, which is very close. All right. Any questions from members of the committee? Any questions from members of the council? Any questions from members of the public? Just go to the mic. I do think we have to turn it on. If you go to the podium right there, sir, and if you could help them turn it on.
Good evening, Mr. McAllister, members of the committee, members of the public who are here. My name is Michael Zarum. I live in Ward 2. And pretty much know everybody in the room, and I want to thank you for the presentation. I just had a few questions. Is this presentation PowerPoint?
It is not a PowerPoint, no.
It's not. Will it somehow be made available for constituents to review that aren't here this evening?
We do have a PDF available.
Yes, we'll make the proposed maps available as a PDF, so you'll be able to see all the lines
Okay.
and stuff like that.
And is there a tabular form that may list columns that might list, say, what ward a street or an address is in right now and where it may be redistricted to, like in a tabular form? Or will there be at some point?
Part of our task is not only to draw the ward lines, but also then to look towards where the precinct lines would be. Once both of those activities take place, then our third task is to create what's called a street file, which is what goes into the CVRS, the statewide voter registration system. And so that will identify each street, what the address ranges are, and what district they're being coded to. That's what goes into the statewide voter registration system that allows voters to be properly assigned.
So it'll be by state district, it'll also be by city ward, and then also within the city by precinct?
Yes.
Okay. And then can somebody just outline the overall time schedule for where this is and what other tasks need to be done and when it'll be completed?
What the state has asked all the cities and towns is to get your street file updates done by April 15th, so that they can go then into the state system and be cross-checked and checked again to make sure that everything is properly aligned, people are assigned to the right precinct. It needs to be done so that it is in time for candidate filing period. And so that's in end of June. So there's that kind of a window that we're all working under.
Okay. And when you say the street list, that's from the Board of Canvass's office here? Is that correct? Okay. Can you just do me a favor and just zoom in on the intersection of Ward 2 in the southeast corner, because that was redistricted a while ago. In the southeast, if you're not sure, is the lower right corner. Are there any changes in there? No. Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. That's all for my comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from members of the public? Councilman Rex.
Thank you. I don't want to interrupt if any other members of the public have any comments. Couple of quick ones. I wanted to check on whether in this proposal there were any proposed changes as to the boundary between wards 2 and 3.
Part of the ease of canvassing values that I brought in does have all of Waycross and coming into Ward 2. But that's 40 voters or 40 people total. Very, very small number.
Yeah, and I think, let's see, it's a public meeting, so I'm allowed to make comments. So I'll just briefly say that I think that makes a lot of sense, as opposed to having a couple of little dead ends where it's hard to get from A to B. Easier to just keep those streets together. So I thank you for taking a look into that. Let's see. And I guess a question about the scope of the redistricting. I think, but have not been through redistricting before, so I think that the scope of the redistricting in determining the precinct lines would just be focused on the precinct lines as opposed to making a determination as to the voting location itself.
What takes place is that the precinct lines are usually drawn first so that we know where those boundaries are. They, of course, the state law says that you shouldn't have any precinct that is split by a state senate, state house, a ward line, those kind of lines. So you're drawing within the other boundaries that we were showing up here. And that's where you look to what can be done for a precinct. The state law says that a precinct can have, right now it says no more than 3,000 registered voters in the precinct. The House has already passed a bill that extends that to 3,500 is the upper limit. So it will allow us to draw a little bit easier in terms of most of the towns on what would make up a precinct. It also has allowed some of the towns to potentially cut back the number of precincts. It's getting harder to find people that work, 14 hours a day or whatever for poll workers on that side, as well as finding locations on where polling places can be. So that is one of the reasons why the legislature is adopting the 3,500 as a way of helping out the cities and towns. There had been some movement to try to raise that even higher, but I don't think that's going to fly. Right now, the House has passed 3,500. We're waiting for the Senate's activity. And so that's where things are. But they know, and what I've been told by the legislative bodies is that they're trying to get it done so that it can have an impact this time. So that's what we've been working with many of the cities and towns under that assumption in that regard. And that's why, of course, when you could see the screen, that, the number of registered voters in each of these is underneath that boundary.
That makes sense. I ask because Ward 2, as it's drawn currently, has a total of 4 precincts, but 3 voting locations because the closure of Aldridge as a building, and with not just the closure of Aldridge, but the closure and demolition of the Christopher Rhodes School, I would have a hard time imagining 4 precinct locations or voting locations inside Ward 2 unless, say, Pilgrim High School itself was also turned into a voting location, which I think wouldn't necessarily make a lot of sense given that Pilgrim Senior Center and Holloman are both already voting locations, all within a stone's throw of Pilgrim High. So effectively, although it is on paper divided into 4 precincts, it's effectively been 3 precincts, and I believe that if memory serves, the total number of voters at each of the 3 different locations are all between the 30% at Pilgrim High and I want to say 35 or 36% at Holloman, with Norwood being at about 33, 34% for the remainder. So I wanted to just make that brief comment, and I imagine that it would probably be possible to do 3 precincts in the event that it was raised to 3,500 people, but otherwise I think that it would continue to make sense to have a total of 3 voting locations as opposed to 4, especially since that that's what people have been used to over the last 4 years, and it seems to be working well.
Yeah, you'll end up seeing that the work to look at the precinct configurations is what comes next. So, we've been focusing on the wards and getting those correct. Those form one of the boundaries of what has to be respected. So we needed to get the wards done. We'd already done the legislative stuff. The wards comes next, and then we do the precincts. And so that's where we've got all the registered voters in the system. We know how many registered voters are in each census block. And so we can end up looking at that and making sure that we're keeping the number of registered voters in a manageable way, but also looking at, as we'll all be doing, is looking at what's the polling place potential on that side. And, I serve as a poll worker down in my county, have since 2008. And so I'm real cognizant of what makes sense from a polling place standpoint and from a poll worker standpoint. And so, that is something that we've been very much attuned into and trying to make sure that it looks to be a normal precinct on that regard.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at 5:35, we will close the public hearing, and I thank you very much. Thank you.